name is Tony. I hope everybody's having a really good day today. I just want to tell a story about the time I took a canoe trip down the Berland River. My 7-year-old daughter came with me. We were driving down the Hay River Road. I still had the canoe on top of the pickup truck. And when we came to one stream, or one creek actually, that we had to cross over on the way to this airstrip, 10-15 miles up the Hay River Road. I stopped there and I had thought several times before about putting the canoe into the river, the creek right there, and paddling it down to the river, and then following the river down to the airstrip. And I realized it would be farther on the river than it would be on, by road. But I figured it's a good day for it. It was a beautiful day. And so I stopped to pull the canoe down off the truck and took my favorite paddle and put it in. Took my 30-06 rifle out of the truck and stuck it into the struts of the seat. And then my wife took an extra paddle and she tied it into the canoe and put my daughter in the front seat of the canoe. And my wife gave her a blanket and a snack for along the way. We didn't figure it would take too long. And then we took off. My wife headed for the airstrip and she'd wait there for us. And we started paddling down the creek. And it was, oh shucks, we didn't go more than 100 yards. Then we came to this little beaver dam. I had to climb out, pull the canoe up over the beaver dam, and bounce back into the canoe, and away we went. And believe it or not, yeah, I believe it, it wasn't very far before we started running into brush and all sorts of crap just leaning down over the creek like that. We can't paddle through here. So I beached the canoe again and pulled it up out of the river. And we had to walk. Oh, I could see the river from where we were. And we're walking through waist-high scrub, willows and tall grass, and you're having a good time. Beautiful day. And we got to the river and put the canoe in, and away we went. And it was an easy paddle, and the water wasn't high. I think most of the river we probably could have walked the entire length. And it was a nice quiet paddle. I only had to paddle to keep the canoe straight. And any time we hit a rapid, they're all beginner level rapids along that stretch of the river. And so we, just kind of cruise along in the quiet areas and go zipping down through the rapids in the faster areas. You'd stop along the shore here and there to check out different things. And we were having a really good afternoon, making pretty decent time. Most of the time I had no idea where I was, in relation to the airstrip, because I had never done that before. But then we come around one long corner and down this one chute, and it was, again, just beginner level rapids, but it was fast because it was a good slope. And at the bottom, the river curved, it turned, not just curved, but it was the actual hairpin turn. And there was a big log, maybe 18 inches, 20 inches at the bottom. And there was a branch, a broken branch sticking off of that log, kind of like an arm sticking out off the log. So I drifted the canoe sideways to the current, figuring I'm going to, paddle hard to come through the curve so I don't go through the curve sideways. And we come up to that log, and I'm paddling like crazy to get past that snag sticking off of it. But that arm, that branch, poking off of that log like a straight arm, it caught me right smack dab in the middle of the chest. And the canoe kind of swept sideways under that snag and started tipping us on our side. So I stepped out of the canoe. Water was only about mid-thigh. I stepped out of the canoe. My daughter was hanging on for dear life. I told her, don't let go of the canoe if we dump into the water. And boy, she didn't. That canoe come up on its side, and I grabbed it as I stepped out, and I pulled it up right side up again. And she had stayed in her seat, dumping sideways like that. She never even left her seat. But the water was ice cold, and she was screaming from the shock and from the fright. Yeah. I took the canoe and I dragged it to the inside of the curved side of the river, the gravel bar right there, and just dragged the whole thing right straight up onto the gravel and got her out of the canoe, and then emptied the canoe, getting us ready to go again. I still had my paddle. And she was screaming and crying. That little girl, I'll tell you. I explained to her that a child crying in the woods can bring in more problems than we've already got. And she says, I understand. And she shut right up. Just went quiet and just, I'm not going to make a sound. So I explained to her we're going to have to get to a place real quick where we can dry off, make a fire. And it was already getting dark too, by the way. So I was looking for a place that was sheltered, where we could make a fire, where there was enough wood for the night. And I found that place about a mile, maybe a mile and a half further down the river. Nice little cove in the trees on a curve. And got there, I beached the canoe and pulled it out. She had lost her boots in that little rollover. So I just, had her stay in the canoe, and I just dragged the whole works up to where I was going to make the fire. And then I got her out, and she was standing on a patch of moss there. There was even snow in that area. And then I brought the canoe in, and I tucked it in between the trees and laid it on its side. It would act as a reflector to the fire. And I set her into the canoe. She was wrapped up in a insulated flannel shirt that I had on. That was still dry because of the way I stepped out, and the shallowness of the water, so that worked. I kept her warm, and then I made a fire, started to make a fire. Everything was damp, just from the mist rising off the river. I stripped some of that old man's beard moss off the evergreen trees. That's usually a good kindling, but even it was somewhat damp, and it didn't want to light. And I'm starting to worry because, man, I was running low on matches. So basically what I did is I was wearing a denim shirt, and I took my knife and I cut the pocket off the shirt. That was nice and dry. So that made a good kindling. It got everything started, and I built up a good fire. And then I took a log, shucks, it must have been 2 feet in diameter, and I rolled it into place on the back of the fire to act as a reflector. So as the fire came up, the heat bounced off the back of this log straight into the canoe, and it wrapped my daughter in a nice warm place. And I got her covered up. I don't remember. I think she had a blanket, but it didn't get wet. I'm pretty sure she did. Anyway, she had a real good bed, and she was laying there in the canoe, on the side of the canoe, and the heat wrapping around her like that. And she was still wearing my flannel shirt. So she was really comfortable, really warm, and she just went to sleep. I had to get her pants off to get them dried out. And, I'm gathering firewood, and I got her pants hung up and her socks hung up to dry. Drying off my rifle, which had gotten wet. Now and then I'd stand up and look out around at the country around us. Just heavy spruce forest, dark in there. And then there was snow all along the river. But we had a beautiful full moon that night. And it was very quiet in there. And the moonlight on the snow with the trees and the tree shadows on the snow. It was kind of like a fairyland. It was just a beautiful, peaceful place to spend the night. Even though you don't intend to spend the night in the woods, sometimes it can be a delightful experience. So we spent the night in the woods like that, and in the morning, she woke up. She was all warm and dry, fully dressed again. And, she had a snack there, so I gave it to her to eat. And she was kind of crying quietly, and I said, "What's the matter?" And this was just, she said, "I'm worried about Mom." Even at 7 years old, she realized that Mom would be waiting for us and worried silly about us. And she was worried about her mother. So, on that note, we just kind of put everything back into the canoe, settled her in place in the canoe, and I dragged us down to the river. Yes, I did put my fire out. And we started paddling down the river towards the airstrip campsite. And my daughter got a real treat. Almost right from the beginning, there was a beaver swimming ahead of the canoe, and every few minutes, every few seconds, he'd slap that water and he'd dive down under the water. And then he'd come back up and he's swimming ahead of the canoe and slap again, and down he'd go. And she was just fascinated by this. Well, sure enough, we went down that river a mile, and doggone, there was a section of river that was froze over. and the ice was too thick for us to break with the weight, with our weight. So I had to take to the shore. We had to climb up a steep bank about 20 feet, I guess. Not bad. But I had to support the canoe while I pulled her up the bank. I didn't want it rolling over and dropping her back into the river. I got the thing to the top. A little bit of work there. And we had to walk half a mile through that same kind of willow, long grass stuff that we had done at the beginning. And when I got to the top of that bank, though, I could see where the campsite was. We had camped about 2 miles, maybe 3 miles total from that campsite. But we couldn't finish the trip that night because it gets dark on the river. You can't see what you're dealing with. We couldn't, see our way to go. So it still worked out good. And maybe a half a mile from the campsite, we were able to get back onto the river. A little bit of ice there. But we were able to crash through it and come to the free water on the other side. And a little bit of paddling, we got ourselves to the campsite and beached the canoe. Now I just kept my daughter in the canoe because she had lost her boots. She had nothing to wear on her feet. So I just dragged her in the canoe over to the car that was still there. And my wife was not there. Apparently, they had reported us missing there during the night. And the RCMP had brought her home and made her stay at home. Why she had to wait at home, I don't know. Their reasoning is cops. But this big blue helicopter came over maybe 15 minutes after we got to the car, the truck. It apparently followed our route all the way from where we went in. They could see every place we came out of the river and where we'd spent the night, and they tracked us all the way to the campground. The helicopter landed maybe 100 yards from the car, and he walked over to talk with us. Found that we were all okay. We had a good night, and they were gone. My daughter and I had something to eat, and then we loaded the canoe back on top of the truck, and we headed home to Mom. I think we both agreed it was pretty stupid of me to bring the daughter with us. But if I had been alone, I guess the cops wouldn't even have come out for another 24 hours or so. They were worried about the little girl, rightly so. But that was the trip that I remember very fondly. I was blown away by how strong that little girl was. 7 years old. I swear she was stronger than most of the full-grown men I'd worked with in the mines. Very proud of that little girl, although she's not a little girl anymore. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.